In late May of 1941, the cold, gray waters of the North Atlantic were the setting for one of the most intense naval chases in history. And right at the center of it all was Germany's most powerful, most feared battleship, the Bismarck. This is the story of its final, dramatic days. So this is where our story ends, with the mighty Bismarck, a burning, shattered wreck on the horizon. But how did this absolute titan of the seas end up here? Well, to understand that, we've got to rewind the clock just a few days. All right, so the Bismarck's mission, it had a codename, Operation Rheinübung, was pretty simple, but absolutely terrifying for the Allies. Its job was to break out into the Atlantic and just wreak havoc on the convoys that were Britain's literal lifeline, bringing supplies from North America. The Bismarck was meant to be a ghost, a predator that could starve Britain right out of the war. And it didn't take long for the Bismarck to prove just how deadly it was. On May 24th, it ran into the pride of the British Navy, the battlecruiser HMS Hood. In a shocking display of firepower, the Bismarck sank the Hood with a single, devastating salvo. The loss sent shockwaves through Britain. This wasn't just a hunt anymore. For the Royal Navy, it was now about revenge. So the order went out, find the Bismarck, and sink it, at all costs. The Royal Navy threw basically everything it had into the chase. We're talking battleships, aircraft carriers, cruisers, destroyers. They all started converging from all over the Atlantic. It became one of the biggest naval manhunts ever. But then, disaster for the British. On May 25th, they lost her. The Bismarck just vanished. You can see here the British thought it was heading back to Norway, so they searched northeast. But they were wrong. The Bismarck had given them the slip and was steaming southeast, making a run for the safety of occupied France. The prey was gone. And this, right here, is the turning point. The German commander, Admiral Lütjens, thought he'd shaken them off. He thought he was in the clear. And so he made a huge mistake. He broke radio silence to send a long message back to Germany. The British picked it up, they triangulated the signal, and suddenly they knew he wasn't going to Norway, he was heading for France. The hunt was back on. Now, the clock is ticking. The Bismarck is getting dangerously close to the range of German air cover from France. If it gets there, it's safe. There was only one British force close enough and fast enough to have any chance of stopping it. The torpedo bombers from the aircraft carrier HMS Royal. The whole chase, everything, now depended on a handful of pretty outdated planes. And, I mean, you have to picture this. It's an almost comical mismatch. The attackers are these old Swordfish biplanes. They were slow, covered in fabric, basically antiques even back then. And their target? A state-of-the-art, heavily armored battleship. It was a true David versus Goliath situation, in the middle of a huge Atlantic storm, no less. And then, the impossible happened. A one-in-a-million shot. Against all the odds, a single torpedo launched from one of those little planes hit the Bismarck's stern. It didn't sink the ship. No, it did something far, far worse. It jammed the ship's rudders, locking it into a turn. The mighty Bismarck could no longer steer. It was doomed to sail in circles. By the morning of May 27th, the trap had been sprung. The crippled Bismarck was a sitting duck, just circling helplessly in the Atlantic. And the Royal Navy's heavy hitters, the big battleships that had been chasing it for days, were finally closing in for the kill. With his ship crippled and the enemy fleet appearing on the horizon, Admiral Lütjens sent one last, defiant message. There would be no surrender. The crew of the Bismarck was going to fight to the very end. And arriving to deliver the final blows were two of the Royal Navy's own giants, HMS King George V and the veteran HMS Rodney, which was armed with massive 16-inch guns. What followed wasn't really a battle. It was more like an execution. The British ships fired around 2,800 shells at the helpless Bismarck. It was just a brutal, relentless pounding. By about 9:30 in the morning, all of the Bismarck's main guns had been knocked out. It was silent. So the Bismarck was now just a burning, silent wreck, its superstructure completely torn apart. But as it finally slipped beneath the waves, a new question came up, one that would be debated for decades. What actually delivered the final fatal blow? So yeah, who really sank the Bismarck? Was it the absolutely overwhelming firepower of the Royal Navy? Or was it an act of defiance from its own crew, who decided to scuttle their own ship rather than let the enemy capture it? Well, forensic analysis of the wreck years later gave us the answer. And really, the answer is both. The evidence shows that, yes, the crew did set scuttling charges to sink their own ship. But the analysis also concluded that the damage from all those shells was so catastrophic, the ship would have sunk anyway from all the flooding. The human cost in all of this is just staggering. Of the more than 2,200 men who served on the Bismarck, only 114 survived that final battle and the freezing Atlantic waters. Over 2,100 men were lost. And it's so important to remember that behind the grand strategy and the powerful machines, these were all individuals. This memorial here honors a sailor named Franz Kienost. He died on the Bismarck. He was only 23 years old. It's a somber reminder of the thousands of stories that were lost that day. You know, in the aftermath, even the British commander, Admiral Tovey, didn't really gloat. Instead, he actually paid tribute to his defeated enemy. He acknowledged the bravery of the Bismarck's crew, fighting to the very end against odds that were just impossible. And that just leaves us with this one final haunting thought. What if that 1 in a million torpedo hadn't hit its mark? What if that lucky shot had missed? Would the Bismarck have made it to France, only to be repaired and sent out to hunt again? It's just a powerful reminder of how a single moment, a little bit of chance, can completely alter the course of history.